Okay, so this one today is going to be a little bit harder for me to figure out where I want to cut out because this is a little bit longer day generally in class. So I'll be shrinking this wherever I can. Beginning there, the 14th Amendment. So 14th Amendment, those three, now the 14th Amendment, usually when you memorize it in like a civics class, you think of it with the 13th and the 15th. So the 13th freed slaves, the 14th made the freed slaves citizens, and the 15th gave ex-slaves the right to vote. So that's normally what we think of, but when you break down parts of the 14th Amendment, you see the underlying parts there, the underlying clauses. These are really important to know. The First Amendment has brought the most cases to the Supreme Court, but the 14th Amendment has brought the next most cases. Now, we're going to be talking about those first two underlying parts of the 14th Amendment, but that third one, equal protection of the laws, that's where the entire civil rights movement comes from, basically, that everybody has to be treated equally under the law. If you see the second clause there on the 14th, it says you can't be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And the Fifth Amendment also says it. The difference is in the 14th Amendment, they add the word state. So the Fifth Amendment applied originally only to the national government, and then the 14th Amendment, they added to states. So they're basically saying this due process of law thing is so important. States and the national government can't take it away. Now, the slaughterhouse cases, this is where I'll probably cut out a little bit, but the slaughterhouse cases were a series of cases that were lumped into one when it made it to the Supreme Court. Basically, what happened was a bunch of butchers in Louisiana who sued because people were getting sick from bad meat in Louisiana, and so the state didn't know what to do. So what they did is they basically banned individual butcher shops. They shut them down, and they said we're going to have a couple huge butcher shop places around New Orleans, and those butchers could apply to go work there if they wanted, but we're not going to allow there to be like a Bob's butcher shop on one corner and a Jim's butcher shop on another corner. So the butchers were mad. So they sued, and they said that they had a constitutional right to be a butcher. They based it on, they said that the 13th Amendment was being violated, and the court just laughed at that. They said, you're not being enslaved. That's stupid. But their argument was that if they want to have their own butcher shop, they're not allowed to, and then they have to go work for someone they don't want to work for. It's kind of like the same as slavery, and the court laughs. The other part of their case was really based on the Privileges and Immunities Clause. And they said, we think that means there are certain rights that we have that can't be taken away, like the right to be a butcher. And so the court really looked at that Privileges and Immunities Clause, and then they looked at the whole 14th Amendment. And part of the 14th Amendment that I left off there says all people born or naturalized to become U.S. citizens or whatever, born in the United States or naturalized, are citizens of the United States and of the state that they reside. And so they basically separate United States and state. The Supreme Court's trying to analyze the Privileges or Immunities Clause. And so they look at it, those three clauses here, and they go, wait a minute, something's different about the first one compared to the next two, if you're looking at the 14th Amendment. And the court says, if you look at it, parts 2 and 3 say, nor shall any state deprive any person. And then part 3, nor deny to any person. So in part 2 and 3, it just says you can't take away people's rights of due process and equal protection. But the first part says no state shall make or enforce laws which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the U.S. And so you see one part says you can't take away the rights of citizens of the U.S. And the next two parts say you can't take away any person's rights. Well, which one is more all inclusive, all whatever? And the thinking would be the last two are. The last two are basically saying you can't take away the rights of citizens that they get by being citizens of North Carolina and the ones they get by being citizens of the United States. But the first one says you basically just can't take away rights of citizens of the U.S., but you could then take away rights of citizens of North Carolina or whatever. So basically what happens with the slaughterhouse cases, the short version is the Privileges and Immunities Clause is so limited because of the decision that it really is, I think it's only been used once ever as the real focus of a case. And so they basically said you can take away people's privileges and immunities, whatever the heck those are. And so the reason I say that, and again, it's a short version, is because that's why the court is going to have to come up with what they do later when they want to find the right to privacy, the right to use contraceptives. Because while some people think it could have been in that privileges and immunities clause, the court really limited it. Now, the court could always change their previous decision, but what's happened is people taking cases to court and the judges have just found other ways. So that brings us to the bottom part here. The judges in the 1960s really wanted, the majority, the liberal judges, wanted a right to privacy, but it's not in the Constitution. So what they did is they looked at, when it comes to this case, Griswold v. Connecticut, they looked at the words due process of law, that second part of the 14th Amendment. And the judges, when the majority defined it, they said, well, you know what? You can define due process of law the way most humans would, right? Which most people, if they define due process, would say, well, it's like when the police arrest you, there's certain rights you have, right? So the court says, okay, we're going to call that procedural due process, the procedures. And so the steps the government must go through in taking away one's rights. So the court says those are, that's what due process can be. But we're also, the liberal court goes, we're also going to sort of make up another definition. And we're going to say there's another type of due process. It's called substantive due process. Now, the professor one time that said what that basically means is the substance of laws can't violate the spirit of the Constitution, right? Whatever that is. But that is where they're going to come up with this idea that certain rights are fundamental rights, and they might not be exactly spelled out in the Constitution, but we don't care because everybody should have the right to privacy. And so the judges are going to basically take the words due process and make up another definition that most of us may be glad that they did, although some of us might disagree with the way they do this. So I know that's a real sort of a quick intro, but in Griswold v. Connecticut, which is, it's the first one on here, but it's also the last thing that we're going to get to today because I'm going to show you part of the decision. Griswold v. Connecticut, basically there was an old law that most everybody thought was stupid, and it banned contraceptive use and purchasing and giving advice on or whatever. And this couple was punished because they violated this law. And so they went to the court, and again, even the minority side said the laws are stupid. But the majority basically kind of created a new definition. They found a right in the Constitution, I guess we can say, right to privacy, even though it's not there. And the penumbra theory was the way they did it. And I may have time to get to that, or I may not. But so let me go to what we're looking at. So the Bill of Rights, without rehashing this whole thing, the Bill of Rights does not lay out anywhere in there a right to privacy. So, and I don't know how well all of you know your Bill of Rights protections. Now, in the majority opinion, I'm just going to mention where it's in bold, top and bottom. I just took this excerpt out. This is one of my favorite cases, and so having a 15-minute block here to be able to cover it is nowhere near enough. I usually have fun with this in class. The majority says the foregoing cases suggest that, so they listed some other cases out of this, some court cases, that specific guarantees in the Bill of Rights have penumbras formed by emanations from those guarantees that help give them life and substance. Various guarantees create zones of privacy. And so then they list those amendments. In there they talk about the First Amendment, the Third Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, and then the Ninth Amendment. Now, they say in there, the very beginning, right after the bold there, they say the right of association contained in the penumbra of the First Amendment is one. Well, there's nothing in the Constitution that says right of association, but you may be able to twist it to say that. So, in the Third Amendment, quartering soldiers. Fourth Amendment, no unreasonable search and seizures. So, in the Fifth Amendment, self-incrimination clause or whatever. Okay. So they're going to use then the First, the Third, the Fourth, the Fifth, and the Ninth Amendments, right? And they're going to say, and I'm going to go, well, I'll explain that this penumbra theory, I think I'll have time. At the very bottom, though, they do raise a good point, and they're in bold. Would we allow the police to search the sacred precincts of marital bedrooms for telltale signs of the use of contraceptives? The very idea is repulsive to the notions of privacy surrounding the marriage relationship. Yeah, just how can you enforce it? It's an unenforceable law. So I wanted to just show you, if I can, just a real quick version. This is a very, sorry, I gotta get my tool out here if I can get it so we can go on here. So I want to show you just a real simplified version of this. This basically is the penumbra theory. It is something that more liberal people will say genius, and conservatives will go, oh my gosh, that's insane that they would do that. And just so you know, I'm not making this up, although I'm going to make it be way more oversimplified. So that's that bold there. Specific guarantees in the Bill of Rights have penumbras formed by emanations from those guarantees that give them life and substance. So what it's a couple of things. Emanations from those guarantees. So emanations are rays, basically like light emanates from a light bulb or something, or from the sun. So they're going to say specific guarantees. So they listed these amendments. And again, I don't know how well you know your amendments, but they listed these. Now, if it was me, I would find the right to privacy in the 9th Amendment, but that basically says all the things we forgot, but the judges, we won't be able to get to it today, but for one reason or another, the judges won't go that far. So what they say is these specific guarantees right here have rays coming off them, that they have emanations coming from them. Now, lumping them in here, if you're talking about the right to use contraceptives, and you're putting in the first one, which is free speech and free press and right to religion, I don't know, that doesn't seem to have a lot to do with using contraceptives. Third Amendment's no quartering of soldiers. I don't even know why that's there. Right? Fourth Amendment, no unreasonable search and seizures. The Fifth Amendment does talk about due process, and the 9th Amendment is a vague amendment, but it almost seems to me like some of these aren't even that related, but they were trying to overwhelm you with junk and circumstantial evidence. Right? Sometimes you may do this in essays for other classes where you don't know anything and you just throw a whole bunch of stuff out and hope you kind of trick the teacher. So they say all these specific, there's rays coming off these amendments. The emanations coming from these specific guarantees form penumbras. Well, penumbras is basically their shadowy areas. You see umbra in there, like umbrella, right? So what they're saying is the specific guarantees have rays coming off them. Those rays then form a shadowy area, and in that shadowy area is clearly the right to privacy. And I don't know about that. That seems like a stretch. But that's where the penumbra theory is, that they kind of make up the right to privacy or find it. And most of us are probably glad that they did. And so I will just finish with this last one. So there are two people who dissented in this case. And it's not that they, were crazy or something and loved the law. But the first one I'll skip for now, but he's basically saying, sorry, there's a way to, you don't just make up, what the Constitution means. You have to amend it if you don't like something. Justice Potter Stewart at the bottom says basically, since 1879, Connecticut has had on its books a law which forbids the use of contraceptives by anyone. I think this is an uncommonly silly law. As a practical matter, the law is obviously unenforceable, except in the oblique context of the present case. As a philosophical matter, I believe the use of contraceptives in the relationship of marriage should be left to personal and private choice based upon each individual's moral, ethical, and religious beliefs. As a matter of social policy, I think professional counsel about methods of birth control should be available to all so that each individual's choice can be meaningfully made. But we are not asked in this case to say whether we think this law is unwise or even asinine. We are asked to hold that it violates the United States Constitution, and that I cannot do. He says, look, yes, it's a stupid law. We all agree. It's not the court's job to decide to get rid of it, though. It should be the government that passed the law. They should get rid of the law. He's saying the court should not just be making up things. And so I will stop there, but I wanted you just to think a little bit about that. So Griswold v. Connecticut, right to privacy, in this case in contraceptive use for married couples. and it extends to unmarried in another case later on. So we will stop there for today. Thank you.